Live and local, politics and chill.
Yes, good evening. I am Ben Weiss. This is Politics and Chill, a sideways look at local politics across Surrey and Sussex. Now, as promised, Muse, the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, The Killers, Joe Strummer, Will I Am, all played at a particular venue in Brighton in the years before it shut in 2010, joining more than a third of small venues that closed their doors between 2007 and 2015. Now, that venue in Brighton is still boarded up. It's a sad reminder of its former glory. And it's where I met Beatrice Bass. She is a local Lib Dem activist, and she wants her party to stop this happening again.
Yeah, no, basically it was the most iconic venue in Brighton, and but out of interest, I actually also looked up what bands played here, and it's literally
goodness.
like Will I Am actually played it, and The Killers, Butter Shoes.
Butter Shoes was my first gig, but up in Peterborough.
Really?
That was the first gig I went to, yeah.
Do you know, what's his name?
A decade ago, the Free Butt in Brighton was playing host to some pretty big bands. Lib Dem politician Beatrice Bass was among them.
I think Muse and Coldplay might have played here as well. I wasn't quite sure, but I found tickets for them at the Free Butt in Brighton, so it must have happened.
Look at it now.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of disappointing aspect of it, you know? So you shut down this absolutely legendary venue in Brighton where every single famous band would have gone through in their touring cycle, and then you know, you don't even do anything with it. It's like nothing. So you shut down something amazing for nothing.
So what happened then? What happened to this place?
So basically someone who lives next to the above put in a complaint under statutory nuisance to the council, which then served a notice, a noise abatement notice. I think everyone was fighting it. The venue tried to be very accommodating, doing soundproofing. And I remember towards the end, there was actually a noise reduction, so you could only play up, I think it must have been 94 or 98 decibel, and if ever you've attended a live gig, you would know that one hit on your snare or a crash cymbal will already be up there. So the law is at the moment, if basically nuisance law allows for someone to move to the nuisance and then complain that the nuisance is there. So if someone moves to somewhere where it's noisy, to a long-established venue, by example, you know, they can then say, oh, it's noisy, there is a venue, even though it was very clear from the beginning. And it's a bit of a peculiarity in English law, actually, and it's one thing that I want to change, actually.
Live music's in trouble. The UK music census found that around half of an artist's income is from live gigs, with just 3% coming from recording. But between 2007 and 2015, more than 1 in 3 grassroots music venues closed down. Phil Nelson knows all about that. The listeners can't see your walls, but they are gleaming.
Well, I can try and describe them. I suppose it's showing off, really. But no, I've been an artist manager since 1988, a long time. And the Levellers, Brighton's own The Levellers, were my first band. And so up on my wall, I think there are 6 platinum and gold discs from the Levellers, who I managed from their beginning up until 2004, I think. When an artist does well, you get a gold or platinum or silver, depending on how well they've done disc. And why wouldn't you display them, I suppose? Some people put them in their toilets. I've put them in my office.
So for the bands that you manage, how important are gigs?
Well, certainly the sorts of bands that I manage, or artists I manage, all tour. I don't think I could imagine managing an artist that didn't play live. To me, a great gig of whatever level is one of the most exciting things that you can experience, and you can't replicate it.
We're being a bit hard-nosed about gigs because they're not only an amazing thing to go to, an amazing thing to play at, they're also presumably quite important in terms of those artists who want to make a living out of their work.
Yes, and I think this is where things start to get a bit complicated, really, because, historically, we kind of have what I call venue ladders. Everyone's got to start somewhere. If you're a brand new act, you're only going to get your friends and your family to come. And your friends and your family are only going to keep on coming to see you for a certain amount of time, after which they'll get a bit bored by the idea and you might have to get some real fans. But that moment's really important. And we call these, it used to be called the toilet circuit. So luckily we've woken up to the fact that's not terribly polite or fair on the poor venues. So it's now called the Grassroots Music Venue Circuit.
Here in Brighton, what would be those grassroots venues? What would be some examples of those?
We are overrun with venues. So in terms of the grassroots ones, we're looking at everything from the Hope and Ruin on Queen's Road. We've got the Green Door Store. We've got the Albert, the Quadrant, the Pipeline. Really, a grassroots music venue, generally we're talking about venues from 50 up to maybe 500 capacity. Sadly, the rest of the southeast of England, there's a much bigger problem, and it's one that I'm actually looking at the moment personally.
So what have we lost over the last few years?
Where bands used to go on 50-date tours and then cover lots of the country, they might only go on 10-date tours. And if it's 10 shows, is Brighton going to be one of them? They think, well, London's as furthest south, we need to go. So that's been a bit of a problem. Venues that can't cope with the rise in business rates, it means that the venues have closed down.
Melita Dennett presents BBC Introducing in the South, and that's a picture she recognises too.
Yeah, it's definitely been getting worse over the past few years. We've seen so many small venues closing down across Sussex and Surrey, and to be honest, venues like those sort of small capacity ones, kind of 50, 60, 100 people, are the absolute lifeblood of new music coming through, because they give people a chance to play in places where they can work their craft, they can develop their stage craft, they can work on their songwriting. And it's an absolute disaster for the music scene that those kind of venues are closing down. It's a real mixture of things as well. I mean, a lot of it is noise complaints. And the irony is that so many venues have been there for donkey's years. Then you get a housing estate built next to some venues, and the people who move in there complain. Business rates are really important as well, because there's not a huge amount of money in live music, not at that kind of level as well. So some kind of business rate relief would be extremely helpful.
The sad statistic is that there isn't a single venue in the country under 300 capacity that breaks even on gigs. There is an assumption that the minute that you play on stage, you must be famous and therefore you must be rich. And believe you me, it's almost certainly not the case until you're headlining a significant festival.
But what can politicians do about these problems?
I'm Joe Miller, I'm Councillor for Rottingdean Coastal Ward, and I chair the Live Music Policy Panel.
In 2016, in the wake of the closure of venues in Brighton, Tory Councillor Joe Miller was tasked with investigating what was going wrong.
It was about 2015 or 2016, and that was it, mainly in relation to venue in the city. It had a noise abatement notice on it. We as a council have very little wiggle room with noise abatement notices from the council's point of view. If it goes over a certain level, then we have to serve one. But what we can do is be helpful to the people that we have to serve it to as to how they can mitigate impacts from it to satisfy that. We also looked into how when new buildings go in next to existing, so you've got a new block of flats next to an existing pub, then they moan about it, whether that's fair or not. The crux of it was a lack of communication between public bodies, environmental health, licensing, the police, and the owners, the artists, etc. And also a desire to actually promote live music within the city and sort of let it and let the council sort of help it flourish, because it's really good for our economy and how we can help younger people get into it, and also more disabled people as well.
And so what's the council doing now that it wasn't doing before?
Primary one was to create a partnership, which is similar to the transport partnership, where all the bodies and all the people who are interested come around a table and communicate and share their concerns and look for funding opportunities or look for ways we can do things differently in order to grow the live music scene in Brighton and protect what's there currently.
Phil Nelson agrees. He reckons much more could be done to recognise the value of venues.
For example, we need underage gigs. We need to start to get the 16, 17, 15-year-olds to enjoy the concept of going to see live music, to become the next generation of gig goers in the future. But the venue owners will go, well, they're not going to drink any beer. Well, they're not allowed to drink any beer, so they're not going to make us money over the bar. We lose money in gigs. Why would we want to put on... Saying to the council, well, if we've got people going to gigs, maybe they're going to actually not be off doing things which are less what we want them to be doing. So yes, that sort of dialogue, it can be about knowledge. Obviously, the funding element is all important. I think there's more of a central government thing.
And Beatrice Bass is planning to change her party's policy to commit the Liberal Democrats to defending live music.
I've handed in a policy motion to Lib Dem conference, and it's called Save Our Music Venues, which is already kind of self-explanatory. I basically want to protect music venues, and I want to change the law and enforce current legal protections for venues. And one of these things would be to change nuisance law so that there is like exceptions for long-established, known music venues.
Those aren't the only problems, I guess, facing live music venues. What else would your motion do?
It's funding, actually, because again, prime example is the Sticky Mike's Frog Bar in Brighton, which is another venue that just recently shut. I'm very disappointed about that as well. And they had funding issues as far as I am aware, and many small venues struggle because, yes, you do get the odd sell-out night, but of course, because you're there to nurture the music industry, you have people starting out and they do not come with a ready-made crowd. They're building this crowd.
Interesting, so using public money to subsidise this, like operas subsidised, I guess.
Basically, yeah, because there should be arts funding, and I think kind of contemporary music has been a little bit neglected in this country. I hope I get this motion through, because that means it would be official Lib Dem policy to protect music venues.
Live music isn't just about making memories. It boosts the economy, it can turn your town into a destination, and it pays for the music industry. But smaller venues are under pressure. It's harder and harder for them to make ends meet. They're at risk of noise complaints if their neighbours move nearby, and getting licences for some events can be a challenge. But without them, there are no lower rungs on the ladder, nothing for artists between their bedrooms and the arena. There are things politicians can do to make life easier for these venues, and it also sounds like those venues could be doing more to help themselves.
Thank you. Good night.
And thank you to our own Melita Dennett, Councillor Joe Miller and Phil Nelson, who is also a lecturer at the British and Irish Modern Music Institute in Brighton.
Politics and Chill on BBC Sussex and BBC Surrey.
Yes, you're listening to Politics and Chill with me, Ben Weiss, and for the next 20 minutes we're going to be discussing whether politics can save live music. If you've got thoughts on this, maybe there are things that can be done to protect local venues, maybe local venues could do more to help themselves, let me know. 81333, start your message with the word radio. Well, on the line now, we have Beatrice Bass, whose motion is going before the Lib Dems conference in the autumn. How are you, Beatrice?
Hello, Ben. Thanks for having me on the show. Pleasure to be here.
No, thanks for joining us. And with us in the studio, Chris Shepherd from Jaster 11 Promotions. So you promote gigs and artists across Surrey.
That's right, yeah. Thanks for having me in the studio as well. I mainly put on gigs in Guildford, at the Star and the Holroyd and sort of venues.
And I want to talk to you about the Star later. There's a big news on that in the last few weeks. And also on the line, we have Beverly Whitrick, who's the Strategic Director of the Music Venue Trust, and you sort of look after venues in general, don't you, Beverly?
We do, yeah. We're the UK charity that was created to protect, secure and improve the grassroots venues across the 4 countries of the UK. So we actually have a membership of 550 plus music venues as part of our Music Venues Alliance.
And these 3 people, listeners, are, I think, the best 3 people to pick through this question of whether politics has a role to play in stopping this decline in venues that we've seen in recent years. I want to start with Beatrice, the politician in that case. Beatrice, just tell us what, first of all, this motion, what sort of reaction have you had to it so far?
Actually quite very positive. And the one thing is because, of course, I'm active in politics now. I'm the parliamentary candidate for Hove. But actually, in a previous career, I was a professional musician myself. So I was a bass player, a session musician, and I played for bands like The Wedding Present, for instance. And I have done international touring. And I think that really helped me to get some kind of attention of other politicians who are eager to listen of what can be done. And this particular motion was supported by Ed Davey, our former environmental secretary, but also Tim Farron, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats. And that just shows there's a lot of support already there. And the fact that it's been selected to be debated by the members of the Lib Dems at conference is already very promising. And we are, of course, a pro-music kind of party. anyone who's ever been to a Lib Dem conference or who's heard about it would know that we have events like Lib Dem Disco or Lib Dem Glee Club. So,
well, to be fair, I've heard various Lib Dem politicians singing like Glee Club, and I think certainly anyone who's listened to some of them might dispute the idea that it's a party that's friendly to music in every case. Only joking, but in terms of your emotion, I mean, let's start with noise, because I think the thing that we heard right through the interviews in that piece was that this problem where you can have a long-standing venue where a developer can come along and build a load of houses around it, and suddenly the new residents, the new neighbours can complain about the noise and put all sorts of restrictions on the venue. So how exactly would you change noise law?
Yeah, so a lot of these problems stem from nuisance law, be it statutory nuisance law or also private nuisance law. And in a nutshell, it allows for you to move to the noise and complain that there is noise. So you can move next to a long-established, known existing venue and complain that there is a venue that will be noisy. And then if you complain, the council has to serve a noise abatement notice and, take it from there. That's exactly what happened to the Freebird in Brighton, as we know. So in order to change that, I would like to change nuisance law. And obviously, as a politician and as MPs, you are at the heart of changing legislation. So I would like to carve out exceptions for long-established music venues that people know that have been existing for years, so that you cannot move next to them and claim for an injunction to shut it down. So that is one thing.
So that's one change. I'd like to bring Beverly Whitrick in at the moment. At this point, I mean, Beverly, what other tools are already available, perhaps, and are they enough? Can they be used more effectively?
No, there aren't enough tools, and actually Beatrice's idea is an excellent one, because one of the areas on which we ourselves as an organisation and then other supportive organisations within the music industry like UK Music have been working is on agent of change, which some people think does what Beatrice is talking about, but doesn't. And that is actually only planning law. So that is a tool where if somebody does build something brand new, seeks planning permission to build something brand new near to an existing venue, there is now policy in England and there's going to be and Wales, and there's going to be legislation in Scotland that says the developer is responsible for mitigating any negative effects of that development, which means that they're responsible for the soundproofing and making sure that the people that move into it can't complain about the sound from the venue. What a lot of people seem to think is that's anyone that moves near a venue, and of course it's not. As Beatrice has said, that doesn't protect anyone moving into an existing building or anything else. It's only about new development. So the idea that this could be basically extended or taken in to protect against complaints of anyone moving close to a venue would be a wonderful development, and would be something Music Venue Trust would be very keen to support.
So there you are, Beatrice, you've got a fan. And also in the studio, of course, we've got Chris. And Chris, tell us about the Star, because that's pretty new news, isn't it? What happened there?
Yeah, so basically the story of the Star has been rumbling on for quite a while. It's going back to 2014. A developer got planning permission to convert offices right behind the venue into flats. And it sort of came to a head about a year and a half ago when the developer actually started complaining about the noise from the venue. Which eventually resulted in Guildford Borough Council serving a noise abatement, which was about August last year, I think. Following that, Shepherd Neame, who were the owners of the pub, they decided to take the council to court in a bid to save music at the venue. And we found out a couple of weeks ago when the court hearing actually took place that the Star won it, so the judge ruled in favour of the Star and quashed the noise abatement.
And that's quite a big victory for local live music. I mean, just more generally, as you're a promoter, I mean, what do you look for when you're trying to find venues for your events?
Normally the way it works of how I do it is if I get offered a band, I'm an independent promoter, so I don't sort of use one venue particularly. So I try and fit a venue that matches the band. So if it's a smallish band that's just sort of emerging, the Star's about 100 capacity, so it's ideal for for sort of up and coming bands, and then if it was a bigger band, then you look for a bigger venue.
And recently, I mean, what's happening to the supply of venues near, like around us here in Surrey? I mean, are you finding it's harder to find a venue? Is it?
Guildford, we're actually quite lucky. There's 3 venues in Guildford. There's Boiler Room, the Star, and the Holroyd, which is a fairly recent one. I don't think that's the case in a lot of towns in the country. Brighton, I think, has got quite a lot of venues, but again, as we've heard, they've been on the decline, and they've been on a decline all around the country, really.
And one issue that I think, another issue, moving from noise and moving from sort of the general shortage of venues that came up a few times in the piece, was, I think, this sense that a bit more funding could be brought into the UK live music scene. I mean, Beverly, you've got the view of the whole sort of, the whole country, really. I mean, when you look at sort of that study that UK Music did of how the Arts Council was awarding funding in 2018 and found that opera got nearly 2/3 of the money that was available for music projects, and leaving very little for any other kind of contemporary music. I mean, what do you make of the way that public money is allocated, Beverly?
Well, there's a couple of different things to say about that. The first is that the big problem that grassroots music venues suffer from is that they're not really perceived as cultural venues. And the reason that they haven't historically had support and funding in the same way as art centres and theatres and galleries is that particularly local authorities tend to view them more as pubs or bars with some entertainment rather than focusing on the quality of their cultural offer. And that has been incredibly problematic in leading us to this position where historically, across the whole of the UK, there are a really tiny proportion of grassroots music venues that have been successful in receiving public funding. I have to just say that actually in Brighton in May, we did make some announcements about some encouraging changes, the main one of which was that Arts Council England have actually created a ring-fenced funding of £1.5 million for grassroots venues and promoters in England to apply for. And we're actually working with Arts Council officers at the moment and venues from across England to put together applications so that they can, most of them for the first time, actually apply for some public funding to upgrade their venues. And what a lot of those venues are looking at is improvements to sound, to lighting, to things like the green room so that artists all feel more welcome and have better facilities there. So this is actually a bit of a watershed moment in terms of public funding for venues in England, in that there has been a response, in fact, to the DCMS Live Music Inquiry, where a lot of questions were asked by MPs and evidence was given. And from that, government actually recommended that public funding should be made more available to grassroots music venues. So this new fund is kind of the first bit of that hopefully changing.
And Beatrice, when we met up at the venue, or the former venue, you were telling me about touring in Europe where there is already some subsidy and what difference that made as an artist.
Yeah, that's right. I really welcome that the Arts Council has now ring-fenced those 1.5 million. It's definitely a good start. So I experienced touring also France, and France does exactly what Beverly has just described. They basically subsidise venue, they subsidise the equipment, lighting, but also staff there. So when you play in France, it's like actually a bit like heaven, because the equipment will work, you have monitors that work, there will be good sound system front of house, good mixing desks, people who know how to work the things, and great lights, and the backstage is really nice as well. I love that Beverly mentioned the green rooms, because I can definitely confirm as a musician the backstage is not glamorous in this country. Wherever you play, you go into these dingy cold rooms with it's not glamorous. So having more funding for that as well would be nice, but predominantly for the equipment, because very often you turn up here and you've got your own equipment that works, but then there's some kind of monitor cable that cuts out and no one knows which one. And it's just a pain. And considering how many famous musicians come from this country and how much revenue the UK music industry makes, we do like £4 billion we generate with just music tourism in the UK, and we can't even get our acts together to subsidise and help fund grassroots venues. That just seems shocking. If France can do it, we should be able to do this too.
Well, there's the gauntlet laid right down. There's another issue that I want to move on to as well, which we heard, which isn't just about getting the venues up to scratch and making sure there are enough of them, but getting people into them. And we heard this from Phil in particular, I think, this idea that it's sometimes hard to find nights that are suitable for under 18s. I know Brighton's a bit of an exception perhaps, but also finding nights that are suitable for disabled people. I mean, turning to Chris as a promoter, how easy is it for you? I mean, do you ever try to make sure that sort of disabled people and under 18s can get into your gigs?
It'd be brilliant if we could. I mean, the venue that I use, the Star, unfortunately, because it's a 16th century pub, it is a bit of a nightmare for disabled people. And also because it's a pub, they tend to be quite strict on under 18s as well. But as a promoter, obviously, I'd love for everybody to be able to attend my gigs. But some of the other venues I use are a bit easier.
I mean, do you have any nights that are suitable for under 18s?
Not that I'm running at the moment, no. But I'd love to do it.
And Beverly, why is that? Why is it so hard for venues and promoters and artists to find an under 18s audience in a live setting?
Usually that comes down to costs, to be honest. And as I said earlier, the big challenge for most of our venues is they are very often treated as businesses that sell alcohol, and the idea is the culture is secondary. And for that reason, there are actually a shocking number of venues across the UK who actually have licences that pretty much prohibit them from serving under 18s. They've been made, conditions have been made so difficult that, it's very hard to justify a show for an underage audience without a lot of extra security, which of course immediately ups the costs. And then you're very much dealing with an audience that's coming in and are not obviously drinking alcohol, and because the historical model of venues has sadly been built on, well, the artist gets most of the money from the door because the venue will get the takings from the bar. If that's the setup of the finances of a gig, and your under 18 audience are basically going to drink a bottle of water each during the evening, then it just is a complete no-go, because out of that raising the money of the bottle of water each, you have to pay your electricity, you have to pay your bar staff, you have to pay your security, your sound engineer, and everyone else. And, the figures just don't stack up. So it's incredibly challenging at this stage without either a change in attitude or more public subsidy to do that. But, there are some venues trying different models of doing it, because this sector is nothing if not entrepreneurial. And, there are some examples of good practice out there. So one of the main things to say is that what's really important is the continuing of sharing different ways of doing things. And that's kind of what the Music Venues Alliance Network is about.
So go on, can you give us an example? So who's doing it well then?
Well, bizarrely, it's a Welsh venue. I know that Club Eiffelbach in Cardiff are trying various different models of under 18 gigs. I'm trying to think who else a bit nearer to where we are for this programme. I know Guildford, the Boiler Room in Guildford, are forever trying new models of community engagement, because they really do like to experiment and try and open up to as wide a community as possible. You've got venues like Broodnell Social Club up in Leeds. There are some really great examples. But, if people want to look at how other venues are doing things, this is actually the best week for it, because we've just launched 2 open source books that are available on Music Venue Trust's website, which is how to open a grassroots music venue and how to run a grassroots music venue. And those 2 books include 28 interviews with some of the people that do this across the UK and have been doing it for years.
We're coming to the end of the programme, which is a shame, because I feel there's another half an hour at least to talk about all of these issues. But just very finally, in a sentence, if you could, politicians have an awful lot on their plates at the moment. They've got Brexit, they've got the health service, they've got all sorts of things to focus on. In a sentence, why should they pay attention to live music and the plight of live music venues? Starting with Beatrice.
I think from what I mentioned earlier, music contributes so much to our economy, not just in revenue, but also the kind of reputation of the country, which is why people want to come and work and live in Britain. And that's what we need to nurture here. We are famous for our Coldplays, Adele's and Muse and all these artists. We're not famous for fishermen, if I may say it like that.
And in a sentence, thanks very much, Beatrice. In a sentence, Chris?
I pretty much agree with Beatrice, to be honest. country's economy, music industry probably generates about 4.5 billion. So I think it's really worth the government making a bit of an effort.
And finally, 20 seconds, Beverly.
Grassroots music venues are social, cultural and economic hubs, and they are essential across the whole UK as places for communities to come together and enjoy cultural development.
Thank you ever so much, all three of you. It's been fascinating, and we do hope that the fortunes reverse of our live music venues. I've been Ben Weiss. This has been BBC Sussex and Surrey's Politics and Chill. We will be back next week with a new sideways look at local politics. We'll be back with a new Prime Minister. But Lewis is up next with his programme, so do stay tuned for that. And keep listening. Follow hashtag BBC Politics with an X on Twitter.
For Surrey and North East Hampshire.
On FM.
Online.
Digital radio.
And smart speaker.
This is BBC Surrey.